Hello, YouTube. Good to see you again. It's been too long. This is my guest video log for the MS Trust. It's a series of videos about multiple sclerosis symptoms, and they are titled, my name is Will, I like to talk, so they are titled Will Talks. Hopefully you will see what we did there. Now, today, well, hold on, before we start, I would like to disclaim, if I can use this as a verb, but first and foremost, I am not a doctor, although they say you are what you eat, and that the opinions and views expressed herein are mine. They're mine and mine alone. You're not allowed to use them. And in particular, they are not those of the MS Trust as a charity or organization. So having gotten that out of the way, let's get cracking. Today I will talks, about fatigue. The F word, the F-bomb, if you will. Well, fatigue is the most commonly reported multiple sclerosis symptom. We can probably deduce it's the most common, although, you know, self-reporting symptoms and actual occurrence are not exactly matching one-to-one because people will not report certain symptoms of the boudoir and bathroom type. Anyway, but fatigue, everything, yes, people will say they are fatigued, and who can blame them, because it's very tiring having multiple sclerosis. You gotta make videos about symptoms and have to explain them to people. I'm losing my train of thought. Fatigue will be reported, depending on the study you look at, you're looking at anywhere between a bit more than half and 96% of people with MS, part of the study. But the figure you see, like, bandied about, as it were, is 80%. So 80% of people with MS, PWMS, or PWMS, as I call them, suffer from fatigue. That is a lot. Now, this brings a question to me, from me, a legit question. If you are a person with MS who does not suffer from fatigue, if you're part of the lucky 20%, I would like to know what your secret is. Maybe it's diet, dextroamphetamine, I don't know, you tell me, get in touch. But still, let's say everyone who suffers from fatigue. And fatigue is I first got involved with the MS Trust, submitting to them an entry for the MS Trust Symptoms Challenge. And my bit was just a bit. There's that. I just kind of send them, 3 minutes of footage of stand-up comedy, explaining and making jokes about fatigue. It's available online. It will be on my channel. It will be on the MS Trust channel. You should like and subscribe and check out my other content. It's all about content these days on the tubes. Anywho, fatigue, yes. So I made some jokes about fatigue, and that seemed to have gone okay. I made a couple of points in this video. One was an analogy to do with, so yeah, I'm not going to do them again, like the point. There was mostly a joke about how fatigue is a French word, and you can derive an easy 4 minutes out of that, n'est-ce pas? But the analogy I used is that of an old phone, or indeed phone with an old battery, because those phones, they claim to be at 80% charge, and you watch one YouTube video, it goes down to 20% charge, and then you charge it and it says it's full, and before you know it, it's back to 15%. So it's about this, and if you unpack the analogy, as I often like to do, because there's a lot going on. I'm very clever, you see. There's a lot going on in my images. But if you unpack it, you'll notice that the problem is not so much the amount of energy, the amount of power, of battery power, of electricity, or whatever you will call it, of, vim and vigor and all this stuff, which we are severely lacking, us the PWMs. But it's not about the amount. It's about the monitoring, the sort of, the value, how you think you have that much, but it turns out you don't, because suddenly you go down. You don't have the advance warning of the lowering of levels of energy. And I think it's important to spend some time explaining that, because let me do another aside here.
My name is Dr. Sexy. I got just what you need.
Smooth little edit there. Thanks, future me. Yes, I got a little sidetracked here. Let me just do an aside before I resume where I cut. There's more than one video's worth of material on fatigue because it is the big MS symptom, and it has all those debilitating effects, and is also certainly, perhaps the most misunderstood as well, which is like the point I am trying to make here, is that as a result of that, I want to target this video to you, the muggles, which are the people not with MS. So I will do a separate video with advice and tips and tricks and stuff like that, but keep this one more about kind of education for non-MS sufferers. If you go online and look up information about fatigue, the MS Trust website would be a good place to start. You will find as much information about how to explain fatigue to the muggles as you will about how to manage it and mitigate it, for yourself. Which, I mean, that's interesting. And I think this is where those videos come in. And like the phone thing or the other image we'll unpack from my skit, one analogy that has been en vogue for the past decade or so is, maybe more than that actually, is the thing with the spoons, right? Like you've run out of spoons and the spoonies. So if you don't know what this is, I mean, you see the amount of research that goes into those videos, right? So this is this American or maybe Canadian woman who suffers from a chronic condition, which is not MS, but I can't remember what it is. And this condition, like a lot of chronic conditions, diseases really, has chronic fatigue as a symptom, and so she talks to a friend and tries to explain and does this analogy that involves you have a number of spoons and any activity you do will cost you some spoons, so you suddenly have to manage your spoons. This really helped educate people to how chronic fatigue manifests, works, and is managed. But because, and there's loads of analogies like that. It's a fairly simple analogy where you'd have to be spooned. The mobile phone things works as well. Like we have this notion of levels of energy is now extremely familiar to us now. We're surrounded by technology that runs on batteries. But it works because it's an analogy in the physical realm. You've got physical objects. You get spoons. You can actually play the spoon game. So let's say I take you to lunch and I grab a bunch of spoons from the cutlery drawer and I lay them out and maybe I let you count them or maybe not. I'll come back to that later. This is very important. And then I ask you to take me through your day. So I say, okay, I wake up, I take a shower, I'll take 1 spoon away. And then what do? Then I walk the dog and I take 2 spoons away, and so on and so forth. And then you get quickly the sense that you need to manage your spoons, and because when you run out and you don't get more until tomorrow, and tomorrow you may not be getting the same amount of spoons. So when you serve the spoon analogy, you have to also add all of that extra information, and activities from one day to the next may not cost the same amount of spoons, and there's a lot of whole other factors at play than just sort of a straightforward cost type game. Let me tell you how it more like in a less fancy, less imaged fashion, what it is like. You can think of, if you assume that you can quantify energy with one variable, just a number, what you'll have is a graph that will be a descending curve that isn't like this. It's not just a straightforward down curve. It's, not only is it curved, but also it has dips and cliffs and odd shapes, but always downward, which the spoon image fails perhaps to capture. So one of the, because there's all loads of other factors, it's not just about the activity you're doing that has a spoon cost. The spoon cost will be based on the time of the day and how many spoons you've got left, and and temperature and your mood and your level of hydration and how much sleep you've had, and so it's much more complicated than that. But the point is, it's completely, like, not random, but it's it's got odd cliffs and drops, and that means that it's extremely unpredictable. And perhaps the spoon analogy fails to capture that. The other thing that the spoon analogy doesn't capture, and that in fact my mobile phone analogy arguably doesn't necessarily capture, although it is kind of built in, because when I say, you know, it's 80%, you watch one YouTube video, and then it's 20%, you feel like it's a sudden drop. And that is a problem in the monitoring. That's the monitoring problem. You don't know how many spoons you've got left, because it's easy to play the spoon game. The trick is to prioritize your day and estimate the spoon cost. I mean, it's project management, basically, right? You've got a finite resource and you need to allocate it, so you prioritize your tasks. You have to estimate the cost of them and line them up and do them in order and manage your fatigue like that. But, well, there'll be a separate video about how to manage fatigue. But that only works, if you kind of the way of playing the spoon game, if you know how many spoons you have left. And because fatigue in French means tiredness. But fatigue isn't tiredness, and fatigue isn't just like very, very intense tiredness. It's almost qualitatively different because there's an order of magnitude. You know, so if tiredness is Boris Johnson, then fatigue is like Donald Trump. It's like the same, sure, but it's not. Although they're getting closer, aren't they? Man, that bummed me out. It's a different kind of thing. I mean, okay, so this is why if you're a muggle, the thing not to do if a Prums tells you about fatigue is to try and empathize with a T, show empathy, it comes from a good intention. We appreciate that you're trying to be a good person, but bear that in mind. When you say, oh, I get knackered sometimes, I know what you mean, you know, type thing, which is, again, an empathetic way of trying to find common ground so that you can feel what they're feeling or try to report. But that is... It's as if me as a man would come to a mother who has given birth, let's say naturally, for the sake of this analogy, and as we speak about childbirth, I say, I know what you mean, because once I've had this really difficult poo. Because you think it's the same thing, and it is kind of like, you know, I guess it's, you know, like, you can see the similarities, of course, but it's not the same. And drawing this analogy is actually offensive. And that is called an invalidation, which is a form of microaggression. And you, the muggles, you shouldn't do it, so be woke. Or awoken, whatever they call it. The other thing about fatigue that is in the bit that I urge you to go and check out again, it was fun. There's this idea that there's a form of fatigue. So yes, when I said earlier that if you imagine fatigue can be quantified by one number, that is hypothetical, because actually there's loads of dimensions to fatigue. You've got physical fatigue and mental fatigue to start with. You already have two numbers to deal with. And you need both to be fatigued, I guess, to be low, or energy to be high, to be able to do something. Because if you get one but not the other, you're equally dysfunctional. So that one part of the fatigue comes from the energy expended by brain plasticity, in fact, in that, so MS, we know what MS has, so that the brain reroutes neural connections around the affected areas, the sclerosis, the plaques, the lesions, scar tissue, and routes it around. And so it's building new connections, and that actually is tremendously costly in energy. This is why teenagers can have or children for that matter, have such a huge appetite. Well, not just that. And this is a cost. Now, this is kind of difficult. It sounds like this looks really good as an idea, because yes, it makes sense, and also it has a hopeful note in it, which is the thing I'm going to talk about. The reason it looks good on paper, people can relate to it, and that's the joke, is that if you've ever been on a bus replacement service from TfL, you know that clearly it is very tiring. But the hopeful note here is about brain plasticity. The idea is that at least the energy you're expending to restructure your neural network is an investment. it's cool to appreciate it. Yes, I'm tired, but that's because at least I'm kind of finding workarounds and not coping mechanisms, because that would be a behavior thing. I'm rerouting around the affected area of the damage, and to establish new connections, which people do. We think that there's no, you can't learn a language and learn an instrument and so on. That's not as true as you may think, and we create new neural connections all the time, man. Just yesterday, I was creating a new neural connection. It's a very good one. I got it. I got a dendrite, and just kind of like turning to the back of the axon, right? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And then squirted a little bit of let's say serotonin. Yeah, it was good stuff. You should try it. You should try it. But then you should go to see the other video for the poems. But I'll tell the muggles the same thing, because everyone needs to loses neural connection with age, and your brain kind of like solidifies into a stone of habits, and you don't get, as a result, much less opportunity to grow. Whereas if you choose to strengthen neural connections, and create new ones by playing an instrument and learning a language, no matter how old you are, and doing like arithmetic, mathematical puzzles, sudokus, this kind of thing, and also doing language games and like word searches and stuff like that. This stuff is amazing, because we now have the technology ever since that. Do you remember there was the Nintendo DS game about your brain age, Professor something, and you get loads on mobile phones and so on. Now we have the technology. I mean, just think. When I was a kid, I mean, I guess you'd get kind of word, crossword grids and stuff like that, but it was much more, it's not quite as cool. So think about it, because neuroplasticity is a good thing for everyone, but it is very good news in a way for poems, because that means that no matter how damaged an area might be, you might just be able to do very fine without it, because the brain is a redundant system, and you just kind of root some nerves around it, and you can imagine a plumber just going, look, man, you had a blockage here, a little bit of lesions. So what I did there, I took, it just kind of work around it. And like just everything in life, if you hit upon a rough patch, just root around it. And I think I will leave you on that. So now it's time for present will to become past will, so that future will, I can become future will, the editing will, and spend some time being extremely irritated at my past self, which is like a hobby of mine. Don't try this one, because it's actually not good. I will see you, hopefully, shortly on the waves, air, only if you get wireless. So I will see you on the wires, on the fiber optic, on the data, on the bits, on the bytes.